Do you really know who your creations are for? What's the trick to turning interesting content into client getting content? And should you start your own personal archive? Well, you're about to find out. Welcome to the Clients from Content podcast. My guest today is Matt Zeigler. Matt helps clients transform complex situations into actionable plans as managing director at Sunpoint Investments, where he oversees strategy and client communications for over $4 billion in assets. You can find him online via his cultish creative brand, where he showcases his unique style of creative question asking and idea connecting across a diverse range of industries. He also has an excellent podcast, which I've been on. So we'll put a link in the show notes and you can go check that out. It was super fun. Matt's mission is to help people foster better connections, feel more informed, and approach life with greater curiosity every day. Hey, Matt, it is great to see you again and welcome to the show.
Josh, it is a pleasure to finally be on a show I so graciously consume on the regular.
Thank you. And I have to say, for anyone who has not checked out Matt's show, you have to go check it out, if nothing else, for the intros, which will put my intro to shame because he has the best intros in the business. I'm telling you, you have to go check it out for that. Okay, so let's jump into it. Matt, what is the first thing you want to know?
So the first thing I want to know is this podcast that you've been on. It's called Just Press Record. I started it. We're almost at a year at this point. And I'm not doing it to get clients or to do anything very specific. It was really more of an experiment in showing my work. But at this stage, about a year in, I'm trying to clarify who's it for and how's this thing grow. So people seem to like watching it and coming onto it, and they're starting to like talking about it. I know I'm still in the infant innings of a very flooded podcast market landscape, but how do I answer this question of who's it for and what should I do to grow as that starts to narrow?
I love this question. I was excited to talk about it because it's so common. I think that when people start things, there's usually kind of two different types of people, right? Where they're like, I want to get this thing. I want this result. And I'm starting it specifically because I need to get this thing. And then there's the other people that are like, I want to start this thing because I'm excited to create it. And it seems cool and fun. And then it actually turns out to be cool and fun and other people like it. And then they get to a point like you where you're like, I think I have something here, but what do I do with it? Like, I don't really know. And so let's start here. And you touched on it a little bit, it seemed sort of fun to do, but like, why are you doing it in the first place? And I think there's sort of two parts to that. There's like, why did you start it? And also, why are you continuing it? You could do a lot of things. Why are you spending your time doing that?
So a big part of this one specifically is, number one, trying to move more of my content into being on camera because I have a background in music and performing and doing stuff like that. So this is a natural place for me to be. So I know I'm good at that and probably have a little bit of edge doing this versus say like straight written word. The second part of it is I already do lots of conversations like this behind the scenes for clients. So there's this whole part of my life where I'm talking to people across disparate industries because these are the types of people that I serve anyway. And I'm just helping make connections between ideas, the way stuff is presented. And I'm always referencing people I see on other podcasts or write about in my personal archive and everything else. So it kind of felt like I'm doing this anyway. Why not just make it a little bit more fun and show the work?
Let me ask you, when you say you're doing it anyway and doing it for clients, do you mean that you're making introductions or are you literally having the conversations with them the way you do on the podcast and kind of being a go-between?
I mean, kind of both. So literally I'm having conversations where I help draw stuff out of people. That's most of my work, is drawing stuff out and then connecting the dots. But then the other thing that I'm doing is I might be talking to somebody who's trying to expand on their franchises, for example. And I go, oh, okay, I've been behind the scenes. I know these 6 people who do franchising and these venture capital people who do this type of financing versus these private equity people who do this type of financing. And I'm making connections like that for people all of the time. So does that answer what you're asking?
Yeah, it does. And it's what's so interesting in you giving that answer is I had no idea about it. So I had no idea. It's interesting that in listening, and I think I first met you because I somehow came across your podcast and listened to an episode and was like, oh, this is really cool. And then you had me on and, we've gotten to know each other a bit from there. I didn't know that this in any way related to or mirrored things that you do in your work life. So that's really interesting because I think like I just looked at it as, oh, this is an interesting, I might have even said this when I first talked about it. This is an interesting spin on an interview show. So the first thing that comes to mind now that I hear you say that is maybe that should be a little more clear. Beyond this show, like this is a thing that you actually do and help people. And it's not just, oh, I came up with an interesting spin on an interview show, right? So I think there's an underlying, in your mind, it's clear, right? In your mind, you're like, oh, this is a thing that I do that provides value to people in a variety of ways. And I might as well start recording it. By the way, not all that dissimilar from what the format of my podcast, which was basically I was having these one-off coaching calls and being like, why don't I press record so that more people can see it? That idea is almost always a good one where it's, oh, let me just capture what I'm doing that people find value and broadcast it so more people can find the value in it. And again, maybe I've just missed it, but it's interesting to me that I didn't pick up on at all that this was a thing you did in your quote unquote day job.
And to make it clear, because in the quote unquote day job, a lot of times it's like people are coming to me and we're talking through really personal stuff, like your personal finances, how your business and your personal finances work together, and then solving this thing with your spouse and doing this thing with your kids and what you feel good and bad about. I can't really record that. That's an unfair ask to say, how can I capture this? But what seems to be happening is people see the way that I engage with other people. And now with this show, with Just Press Record, I'm specifically trying to punch out of the finance industry so that people can go, oh, no, he actually, because I do this. I talk to all sorts of people like you across industries behind the scenes all the time.
But that without getting into people's personal stuff, the underlying sort of connection piece or value, however you want to describe it, is very similar. It's also interesting, and maybe this is also part of what sort of threw me as a kind of an outsider, is naming the show Just Press Record also makes it feel like it's just a sort of general interest interview show. Yeah. So it's a name that makes sense, but it's also it's shaping perceptions of what this thing is, where the name was some other thing that related. It doesn't have to be specifically to your business, but related to sort of the underlying value that you provide in what you're doing. And I'm by no means by saying you need to change the show, but it's something to think about in terms of, Just Press Record is this is a quote unquote, typical podcast kind of thing.
Yeah.
By the way, I want to know the original name for my podcast. I'm 100% guilty of it too. I recently changed it to Clients from Content because I was like, I want to know, it could be anything. It made sense. That's what the show was. Just like with you, Just Press Record is what the show, it makes sense. But for someone who has no context about anything, they don't really know what that is. And they might assume it's sort of just another guy interviewing people on a podcast. So that's something to think about. The other part of this is, I would say, for where you're at with it now, just generally speaking, like, what does success look like? What do you want from it?
So the biggest thing that I want from it is actually watching this network expand of people that I'm connected to and engaging with. So as you know, having a platform like a podcast or something like this developed means you can pull more interesting people into the mix. And that's something that I've already been a benefactor of, just seeing that happen in some of the circles and places I run. And then what that also seems to do is that it's expanding the footprint of people that are aware of me and what it's like engaging with me, which is the other part that I'm here to talk to you about, because it's like stuff is now starting to happen where people are coming to me and connecting that through line for themselves. And then it's, oh, by the way, I do these other things too. And that's an indirect way that it's actually leading to business for my firm and myself.
Okay, great. So with that in mind, and then this is something else that I think is a really helpful exercise for people to do and sort of brainstorm on. Once you have some sort of idea of what success looks like or what you want to get out of it, I think it's helpful to sort of do this hypothetical, right? And ask yourself, what would happen if you had twice as many, we'll say listeners, but I know it's listeners, viewers, whatever. What would happen if you had twice as many as you have now that isn't currently happening? What would happen if you had 10 times as many? And what would happen if you had 100 times as many? And there's no right or wrong here, and it's all hypothetical, but it's interesting to think about based on your own sort of personal definition of success. If I had twice as many, in your case, based on what you just said, you probably could make the case that, oh, that's going to mean more connections and more whatever. Maybe I can get to, it's more exposure, but also it's going to get me, part of this is about building your network in some ways, that kind of thing, right? So, you could maybe make the case that, okay, if I have double, that's going to be more and that's going to be better. If I have 10 times, that's going to be even more and even better, or maybe not, right? Maybe the difference between twice as many and 10 times as many doesn't matter that much because you're only trying to read a certain subset of people, right? 100 times, maybe it's a whole other thing, right? Now I have books and I have speaking gigs and I monetize it and I leave my day job or not. Maybe I don't want to leave my day job. Like that's not the goal. So I think it's helpful, as opposed to when it comes to growth, people just sort of do this, like they get wrapped into this generic grow, like bigger is better. And in some cases it is, but you might go, you know what, 10x, 2x the listeners would be great. 10x the listeners would be perfect. 100x the listeners wouldn't necessarily be better than 10. What 100x is going to unlock for me that 10x won't is not things that I even want anyway. So it's just helpful to sort of figure out like kind of where you're really going. And when you sort of talk about growth, why do you want it? And what is it going to get you? The other thing I think is important to think about is, who do you think this show is for?
I think the show is for people like you, people like me, people who I think sort of self-identify as creative entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs with a creative streak, or people who are where I was just a few years ago. You're inside of an organization and you're not allowed to be creative anywhere. And you're like, crap, how do I get that network? So people who are, again, creative entrepreneurs, are looking to be more creative, or are looking for networking to connect ideas with other people who have interesting ideas and say, how do I get myself out there more? How do I find people who can help inspire things that I'm trying to do or accomplish, either at some bigger scale or just bring back to work with me, just bring back to the board meeting or the corporate office or my kid's school?
How does listening to your show help me do those things?
I think seeing two people engage where they're not just on the talking point pitch, like they're not just on the book tour. So you're seeing people that you may or may not know already organically interact with others. These are all kind of creative entrepreneur type people that are invited on the
Mhm.
show. So I want a self-identification aspect to happen with the people that you see. And then I also want, I know these people are going to come with ideas. I know when I've paired them together and matched them, that there's stuff they talk about fires a whole bunch of stuff in my brain. And now when I get to combinatorially mix them, it makes a bunch of these
Mhm.
things go off.
So let me ask you, I think it feels to me like there's potentially sort of two different values that this unlocks. So one is the sort of straight ahead kind of knowledge, information, inspirational. I listen to this thing, it gives me an idea, I learn something, I apply that to my work, my life. That's a very straightforward, very sort of common thing. But the other piece of this, which clearly you're doing for guests, but I also feel, you're doing in your day job and with your clients. And it sounds like when you talk about it, part of the value that you want to provide to the audience is the actual making of those connections. So there's the, I get information, but also I can get information in a lot of places, but also in a perfect world, in a dream scenario, maybe for you, you're also helping them connect to these types of people, just like you do in the real world in your day job. That, I think, is an interesting thread for you to pull potentially, to think about, how can I help listeners not only learn and be inspired from these people? How can I help connect them to other people like that? And maybe they can't be on my show. You can't have every listener come on your show and introduce them to, right? But there's other things you could do. Could you have, I'm not saying you need to do any of this, but is there a community play that's invite only? Is there a matchmaker service where they can meet other listeners? Is there a place as simple as they can sign up and say, hey, if you're a listener of this show and I do X, Y, and Z, and if you want to connect and have a 15-minute Zoom chat, can you play that? Can you take what you do with two people on an episode of your show and make that available to the audience, some version of it in some way?
All right. So drill into this with me for a second, because this has been
Yeah.
one of the things where I'm getting feedback on this. And more often than not, this comes from somebody who's installed into some type of corporate ladder or something else. And they go, I've neglected my network. Like, how do you do this? How are you connecting with these people? And how can you help either maybe not direct me to these people? Maybe I can't even be a guest on the podcast, but how do I get to feel that more connected feeling? And I'm trying to figure that out. If it looks like a
Mhm.
community or if it looks like a matchmaking service, all of these things have sort of been spinning around me from requests from
Mhm.
people, which is, you're hitting the nail on
Good
the head with
sign.
this. It's a very
Yeah.
good sign.
And I think that's another angle, right? So there's a version where and it doesn't have to, it could be either or, it could be both, it could be everything, it could be whatever. There's a version of it where you're helping facilitate and helping listeners connect, right? Through a community, through playing matchmaker, through events, through networking dinners. Imagine going to a city and saying, hey, I'm going to have a 8-person dinner so we can all get together and, meet each other. And you're going to meet 7 new people in a night. Pretty cool, pretty valuable. And you're going to facilitate conversations and that kind of thing. So that's you sort of actually helping facilitate and make it. There's another version, which is you sort of teaching them how to do it for themselves, right? So, because there's a lot of people where they're like, I actually need people that are in my industry and in my whatever, to your point, right? If they're asking you, how do you do this? Maybe you can teach them how to do it. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. My guess is that there are some ways that you could teach them. That teaching could take a variety of forms, could be courses, could be one-on-one consulting, could be, any sort of thing. But I think that overall, I think you've got to me, a real differentiator would be, you're attracting these people, like to your point, they're like, they want to build their network. They want to figure out how to sort of connect with these people. And you've got the sort of, hey, listen to this episode and you're going to learn a bunch of stuff and it's going to be cool and inspiring and creative or whatever. You've got that. You do a good job of it. People enjoy it. Awesome. Lots of podcasts do that. A differentiation point, I think, is how can you take it a step beyond the sort of inspirational, educational stuff and actually help them make those connections, if that's the sort of underlying premise of the show, which I think it is. And there's a variety of ways to do it. And it's you sort of thinking through which direction you would want to go. Does that make sense?
It does. And you're hitting on this idea of, and I don't know why it just clicked in my head as you were saying it, but it's this matchmaking service. And I kind of
Mhm.
hate the idea of being like, oh, I'm going to do this to get paid finder's fees or something like that.
Mhm.
But I love the idea. And it's central to what I do now in my client work, which is
Mhm.
you're matchmaking people. So if somebody needs to
Mhm.
find somebody else who does a specific job, I help them put together that plan and then connect with those people. But also the ideas of I'm trying to
Yep.
figure out how these, like you're doing with me right now, because I can't do this inside my own head, apparently. How do I take these 3 ideas and how do they fit together? Just help me step
Right.
back and organize these principles.
And the other thing to keep in mind is you don't have to, like, when I say matchmaking service, it doesn't have to be like, hey, pay me $100 to introduce you to somebody. It could
No.
be you can create a level, right? So for example, if you had a community, let's say, there's a message board where they can meet each other, they can talk, like-minded people have come together here. And as part of joining the community, I'm also going to help you, I being you, I'm also going to help make some introductions for you whenever possible. I'm also going to give you some tips and feedback on how to sort of find people in your own market. I have a client who's a comedian who wants to get more corporate bookings and corporate events. And I literally was emailing him some advice yesterday because he was like, well, how do I find corporate event planners? And I was like, here's how you find them. Literally step by, go to LinkedIn, do this, search for this, look for this, send this to them, whatever, a version of that. But you can set it up however you want, but it might be that like, hey, they join this community, they pay this price, whatever. And as part of it, I help them do this in a variety of ways, depending on what they need. Sometimes they need advice. Sometimes they need an introduction. Sometimes they need to figure out how to connect ideas, whatever, but creating some sort of bucket for the people that want more and that can pay you something to justify the time that you put in and go from there.
So like a baseline community layer, like it's almost,
Yeah.
that's the step.
I'm using the word community just because it's so much about connecting, but
Right.
it doesn't even have to be a community. You can decide sort of how you want to structure it, but something, and you don't have to charge anything, but just as if you want, you could start it just for free and have listeners reach out to you, but you're going to start putting some time into it. So
And
I
they're
would
already
recommend
doing that.
I would
So,
recommend
yeah.
there be some kind of something, and you go from there. There's a guy named Andrew Methvin who's a client of mine, and he runs a newsletter called Real Time Mandarin that's all about non-native Chinese speakers who want to improve their language skills. And part of his community or membership or paid subscription or what you want to call it is they can join. I think it's because their problem is they need other people to talk to. They need to practice. So
Right. You
it's
got to get your
different, but
reps in.
similar.
Yeah.
Part of what they join for is, I forget I think it's monthly. There's like a monthly call where a bunch of them can get on with people like them. And it's not networking because they're practicing their language, but it's very similar, right? If I'm going to bring a group of people together and they get to connect and meet each other. Okay. So two more quick things here before we move on to the next question. Well, three more, just for you to sort of think about, and anyone
Please.
that's listening to this to think about as well. Good sort of brainstorming questions for you. So one is, if you could trade places with any podcaster, who would you trade with? It's an interesting way to think about, whose audience is a fit for you? Again, just a sort of thought exercise. The second one is, anytime anyone talks to me about growth, I like to ask, do you actually have a growth, quote unquote, problem? Right. So that gets back into, well, how big do you want to be? How big do you need to be? Is this actually a problem you need to solve, or it's just sort of a nice to have or whatever? And then the last thing here is, in terms of clarifying who your podcast is for, who your content is for, like I talked about before, what do you want and how do you get it? And this impacts titles and everything else. So here are 5 ways to clarify who your content is for. So number 1, you want to ask yourself, is it for you or them? It's likely both on some level, but it's also fine if you're like, hey, this is an excuse for me to meet cool people and learn things, and I like doing it. And ultimately it's for me. And if it grows, that's great and makes it better. But really, I'm doing this for me, and then adjust accordingly and set your expectations accordingly. The second way to clarify who your content for is to ask yourself who you need to reach to accomplish your goal. We talked about that a little bit. What types of people do you need to reach? How many of them do you need to reach, et cetera, based on what you want to accomplish? The third thing is ask the people who love your show why they love it. And just as importantly, what role it fills for them. We all make assumptions about why people enjoy the things that we put into the world. And if you ask them, get beyond, oh, it's really interesting. It's great. I learn a lot. And ask them like, well, what role is the show filling for you? Oh, it's introducing me to people I've never heard before. Oh, it's helping me learn how to sort of pull ideas out of people. Be very interesting to see what role your show is playing in their life. The fourth one is make a list of who your show is not for. Also, things that people overlook, but can be very powerful to go, yeah, it's not for X, Y, and Z person. And then the fifth way to clarify who your content is for is to consider whether you're targeting an audience that's big enough or small enough for your goal. So, for example, if your plan was to monetize through general brand partnerships, how big of an audience do you need for that? If your plan is to monetize through consulting and you can only work with a handful of people, how big of an audience is too big for that, that it actually sort of creates problems? So, there's no right or wrong there, but that can help you sort of sort through who your stuff is for and then optimize accordingly. Okay. Before we get to your next question, a quick side note. Anyone who's listening or watching to this, I assume it's because you want to get more clients from your content or you have accidentally hit the play button. I can help you get more clients from your content. My Clients from Content program teaches you how to get more clients and sales from your social posts, newsletter, podcasts, blog posts, and videos. It's helped more than 500 members use content to earn millions of dollars in revenue. And you can now get access to it for as little as $99. Check it out at joshspector.com/program. Okay, Matt, your next question. What is the next thing you want to know?
Okay. So, and I'm gonna retrofit this around some of the advice you just gave me,
Okay.
but trying to align this public networking exercise that I'm doing on this show with the person I often am in my professional life, which is I know a guy, I know a gal, I know a person who knows how to do this thing. So I can take whatever the presenting problems are and then help roadmap it out into people that can help you with that piece of the puzzle. And in many cases with my client work, it's like lots of pieces of lots of puzzles over the course of lots of years. I'm on my third generation of clients in many cases that I'm working with in their families. You think kind of like aligning this public networking exercise with attracting the right type of people who might also want to become clients too. I don't want to just make it for them, but I want to make sure I'm open enough without being obnoxious about it.
What do you think is preventing you or what makes it hard for you to do that?
So here's the thing, it's happening by accident already. And I don't know if I should be more deliberate in any way about it because I've had people come, and this is like a prime example. I've had people come and they say, I know you can speak my language because I do these other more finance focused podcasts too. They say, I am a, quant systematic trader at this giant firm, but I know you can speak my language. And I also know you can talk to my wife who's a school teacher, or I know you can talk to my husband.
How do they know that? How do they know that based on just listening to your show?
So
or they know that from other things?
Yeah, it's less apparent from just press record, but it's more apparent in other stuff where I'm, going deep with a hedge fund manager about some part of their strategy, but then, getting cooking tips on how they brine salmon in between because that's where the conversation goes.
Do you think you're potentially falsely attributing some of that to the podcast? That they're actually coming from elsewhere and they happen to also listen to the podcast?
So I'm positive that I'm falsely attributing some of it to the podcast just because it's the mere exposure effect. So there's like a halo from the podcast of thinking maybe I can ask this question to this public persona. But the other part of it is it's been said now more than once where again, I feel like you won't just be able to communicate on my terms, but you'll also be able to communicate on my partner's terms or my business partner's terms or whatever else. And that's something that I don't know how to frame. I feel like I could frame this better than I'm framing this.
So let me, again, like with all things, there's no sort of one right answer here, but let me give you sort of two different ways to think about it and think about the role that sort of the podcast plays in your sort of bigger picture business and clients kind of thing, right? So there's one version where the podcast is designed to sort of attract new people. You want to attract the right people who then become clients and work with you, et cetera, right? There's another version where the podcast isn't designed to attract new people into your world. It's designed to show existing people in your world a different side of you, a complementary side of you that makes them go, oh, he can also do that. He can also talk to those other people. My instinct at the moment is that it's right now filling more the latter role than the former. My guess is the people that are hiring you that are listening to the podcast, they didn't discover you from the podcast. The podcast isn't a discovery mechanism. The podcast is, well, let me rephrase that. It's not how they first become aware of you, but it is how they become aware of a different side of you and a different set of your skills. And the awareness of that other side of you helps nudge them over the brink to wanting to work with you.
This is really valuable because it's kind of like making stuff for YouTube versus Spotify. You're
Mhm.
making stuff for a discovery driven platform is different than making stuff for a subscriber driven platform. In a
Yeah.
case like this, I want people to be aware of a diverse range of skills. So that's part of what I'm showcasing. Is that what you're
Mhm.
saying?
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'll give you an example. My podcast is obviously a little more directly aligned with sort of my clients, but what I have found is podcast, generally speaking, for 99.9% of podcasts, not a great discovery mechanism.
No.
So what it is great at is it is a great sort of conversion mechanism. So for me, the role, not I don't have a lot of people, clients or even just general audience members, newsletter subscribers, whatever. Not many people find me through the podcast or the YouTube videos or whatever. There's probably some, but it's a relatively small number. But people that buy from me, people that become clients, people that hire me, way over index on listening to the podcast. My podcast doesn't attract a lot of new people to me. But what it does do is it's a showcase for people seeing how I work with people, right? Beyond reading my blog post or reading my social posts or whatever, they actually see me in real time, essentially coaching people and giving them advice. And so as a result, they see that side of me and they go, people who are sort of on the fence, they go, oh, wait, like that is exactly what I want. So it helps with this sort of conversion as opposed to helping drawing in new people. I think that's probably your situation and probably what makes the most sense to be your situation. And I think just wrapping your head around that also will really, in your own mind, you're like, okay, this podcast is not, I don't have to worry about attracting new clients because that's not what this is going to do. Not really. What I want this to do is I want those clients to be like, oh, I didn't realize he could do that. Oh, that's what he does. It's very interesting. If someone's thinking about doing a coaching call with me and they're like, oh, they're not sure. I can be like, go watch this. They may decide it's not for them, but like in some ways, that's what you're building with the podcast. You're taking away for people who are like, oh, he has expertise for this stuff. And you're showing them that other thing that for some people and for the right people is going to nudge them over. I do still think that your show should incorporate some of the businessy messaging, right? I don't think it's great that I watch and listen to your show and have no idea that you do the other thing. So,
We
I
can
mean,
improve
look,
on
you'll
that.
see me. I literally just gave a promo from my business. Most of the people that are watching or listen to this know that exists, but I want to remind them when they're hopefully watching and listening and going, oh, this is really helpful. Hey, you can have some of this if you want it. So I do think you should connect the dots, but I don't think you need to be like, oh, I need this podcast to attract these specific people. I need it to help convert the people that have found me elsewhere.
I like this idea too. And again, realizing this in real time, talking to you and you doing the
Mhm.
little infomercial, if you will, like segment of the thing
Yeah.
is also thinking as it relates to the first question, conversion, both to pull people closer into the community, like you're just spinning
Mhm.
up the orbit and saying, get closer to the other people involved in this, make sure they know whatever version of that takes on, but then also like the client conversion. If you like seeing the
Yep.
way that I'm interacting with these people, oh, by the way, I do this personally and professionally in these consulting services too.
Yep.
You should get in touch with me.
Yeah.
I gotta
Exactly.
flag that directly.
Yeah.
And it doesn't
Yeah.
feel
You just
gross
need
or
to,
salesy. It just is, oh, by the way, you should know.
you just want them to know. And you're going to see after we do this questions, I'm going to do another little promo and you're also going to see how, how it works again, because I'm connecting it to, it's not unrelated. It's not out of nowhere. Once you make it clear that sort of that underlying purpose for this, then it makes sense. It doesn't feel like it's coming out of left field with, oh, hire me. It's no, this show is about how to connect people and how to pull ideas out and how to whatever. And oh, by the way, like that's what I do. So if you want help doing that, we should talk. The other thing, I had a couple more thoughts for you along these lines. I wanted to talk a little bit about word of mouth, right? That ties into growth and it ties into sort of the right people and everything that we're kind of talking about here. How do you get it to lead to what you want it to lead to? And word of mouth is only valuable if it's the right people spreading the word to the right people. So this is also where making it clear what this show is, who it's for, people that care about X, Y, and Z is going to attract them and help them. You might even say in your promos, right? If you know someone that cares about X, Y, and Z, tell them about this. If you know someone whose idea of networking is handing out 300 business cards to people who throw them in the trash, don't bother telling them about it, right? Like you can have fun with it and sort of draw that line in the sand. Because word of mouth is only valuable if it's the right people spreading the word to the right people. This is why in most cases, virality is overrated. So a story about being a good parent that goes viral on Twitter or LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever, it does nothing for a web design agency who wants clients. They love your parenting story. They're not hiring you because you have a parenting story. And the same is true for a podcast. I know podcasts don't exactly go viral, but like you'll see this all the time where they're like, oh, if I book a big guest, if I book a whatever, I'm going to get all these people. If it's not aligned and not relevant, it doesn't matter. And I would even go a step further to say that the wrong word of mouth, right? Word of mouth from the wrong people to the wrong people can actually hurt you. We've talked a lot about pop culture and all that kind of stuff. So this is an oversimplification, but it's kind of what happened with Dave Chappelle. So Dave Chappelle walked away from Chappelle's show because at some point, in his opinion, the wrong people, quote unquote, wrong people were enjoying the show for the quote unquote wrong reasons. And it made him uncomfortable. And he was like, keep your $500 million. I'm out of here. And he's talked about it. There's interviews with him where he talks about feeling and seeing certain people reacting to the show. And he's like, they don't get it. That's not what I'm doing here. And it frustrated him to the point that he walked away. So I think that's important to keep in mind that, with whatever you're doing, you want to make sure you're getting the right word of mouth and optimizing for that. The other thing I would say here is in terms of growth of a podcast and growth the right way, I'm going to give you 3 questions to help you figure out a growth loop for your podcast that will get you the kind of listeners who you want and who ultimately might become buyers or clients. So the first one is, how does the show help the guests and how are they helped even more by spreading the word about it? Those are 2 different things and they're really important. So what does the guest get out of it? And what more do they get out of it if they actually help you spread the word about it? The second one is, how does the show help the audience and how are they helped even more by spreading the word about it? So what do the people that listen to your show get by telling more people about the show that they wouldn't get otherwise? These are not easy questions to answer, but brainstorming them can help you come up with some things. And then the third one, how does the show help you? And how are you helped even more by spreading the word about it? That one will tend to be a little more obvious. But if you can come up with answers to those 3 questions, which I guess is 6 questions because they're both 2-parters. But if you, the guest, and the audience are incentivized to spread the word, meaning that the more people they tell, the better, the more value it creates for them in some ways, then you're all more likely to spread the word. And that's going to create a loop where everything sort of grows. So not easy to crack, but if you can crack it, or at least crack 2 of the 3 pieces or whatever, that's going to help you. And I'll just leave you with this because I know when I was on your show, we did a lot of Seth Godin conversations. So I'm going to bring Seth back here. So all roads lead back to Seth Godin. So I'm going to reference something he says here that is exactly like what I just sort of talked about. So he says, what actually spreads are ideas that are better when they spread. Think about the first person with a fax machine. What exactly did he or she do with it? A fax machine is worthless if no one else has a fax machine. So what that means is there is an incentive for people to talk about it. So you don't have a fax machine, but what can you do to incentivize people to spread the word about your podcast, your show, your content, your anything you do? Make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And it's something that I knew was core to this idea at the beginning was, to your point about the right word of mouth. Like you have to have the right mouths to do the word of mouth. It's by intentionally picking guests where I know there's going to be something in common. I've figured out a couple of ways so far to kind of like gamify that. I can't remember if you did it when you were on, but I'm making at the beginning, I say, you're going to guess at the end of the episode why I paired you together and we let them take a stab at it. Little stuff like that. But the idea of I'm not inviting somebody on the show unless they're the right word of mouth.
Yeah.
So now the question is, how do I just turn that up another 1 or 18 clicks?
And by the way, and this also can then expand into whether you start a community, whatever it is, that can start to get very clear, right? A community about networking and connecting to other interesting, valuable people is better if there are more people in there, as long as they're the right people. More people to connect to, more resources, more ideas, more whatever. So that piece, that actually fits really well because you can see why they would be incentivized to spread the word because they're more of us. More of us is more powerful. Right? More of us is more connections, more people to learn from, or whatever. So that's an example where it's sort of very obvious how they're incentivized to spread the word about it, right? Versus even what I do in my clients from content program, because it's not really a community, they get access to a skill session and they learn, oh, wow, I now know how to get more clients out of my newsletter. And they're not really incentivized to tell other people to get that.
Right.
I mean, other than, oh, they have a friend and they want to help them, but like, it's not made better for them by them spreading the word. Whereas a community might actually be made better for them by them spreading the word.
Right.
So Now, again, there's other ways to do that. It could be made better, like affiliate deals or discounts or whatever, referral programs. So, like, you can come up with ways to incentivize people to spread things. But when it comes to networking and community, like, there's a sort of built in one there that actually makes sense that would be an advantage and help it grow. Okay. Before we get to your last question, I'm going to give you that promo that I talked about. So, take notes of other things you can do. I've got 2 bonus recommendations for people that are listening to this. So, if you're finding this episode helpful, 2 previous episodes I published that you'll love. So in November 2024, I published an episode titled How to Craft the Perfect Offer that will help you figure out what to offer, how to deliver it, and how to communicate it. For example, at the 3-minute mark of that episode, I explain the most important thing to beware of when defining your niche. And at the 35-minute mark, I give you 7 key questions to ask yourself when creating an offer. The second episode you should check out was published in October of 2024 and is titled How to Get Clients from Your Podcast. In that one, I interview podcast growth expert Jeremy Enns, who shares a step-by-step guide to growing your show. At the 26-minute mark, he reveals how to convert 5 of your 500 podcast listeners into clients. And at the 13-minute mark, he explains what to do when your show's growth has flatlined. Links to both of those episodes can be found in the show notes for this episode to make it super easy and remove any excuse you have for not actually checking. Okay, we're going to get to your next question. But Matt, there you go. That's the first time I've actually done podcast promos in a podcast. An idea I had the other day, and I was like, why am I not doing this all the time? Because I now have historical episodes that people are listening to this topic would find interesting. It'll be interesting to see what that does. But anyway, okay, your last question. What do you got?
I graciously await the update on if these are working.
Yeah.
And it's so much better than stamps.com or,
Yeah.
home security or something. Like it makes sense. It just makes sense. All right. So the last question is leading up to all this, I had started when I had to be anonymous, my own website, what I call my personal archive culturescreative.com. And the whole idea there was just, it was me collecting ideas and collecting people, even if I wasn't directly talking to them in public. In many cases, I was behind the scenes, tracking down cold emailing authors and other people and saying, hey, this was interesting. Am I getting this right? Whatever. And I started this repository, and it was just the idea that I would reflect on something for myself. And back to that idea, this is for me. This isn't supposed to be a newsletter. This isn't supposed to be something else that anybody else really gets any value out of except me. I made it so that people can sign up. And if you want to see me put every entry in, I've done a daily post for 7 years and running, but it is truly a selfish exercise. I kind of like encouraging other people to do the same thing. Do some stuff that doesn't scale. Do some stuff that's purely self-interested if it helps you be better at everything else you do. But I'm wondering if there's a better way for me to frame that, explain why I do this crazy little habit that I have for all these years. How do I show how that fits in? Or do I just not care about it because it's a selfish act? Do I not care about telling others because it's helpful to me already?
So first of all, I got super excited because, again, this is something I didn't know that you did. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know, I think that you, again, things you might want to mention in your podcast. I didn't even know that you have a personal blog that you publish every day for 7 years or anything like that. So when I heard this, it was like in my wheelhouse, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. And personal archive. And again, you and I have a lot of sort of similarities in terms of like how we see and think about media and consume and keep track,
Plus a lot of good black sheep references and other things.
Yeah, exactly. We have that as well. So one of the things I think when you originally referenced this to me was I wanted to ask you about it. So you had a line or a sentence in what you sent over to me with this question where you said something about how to network their ideas with their people. What did you mean by that?
So something I realized in just by doing this for all these years and then converting it into the podcast, the YouTube stuff, was I'm making these notes and I'm making these connections, and I would regularly be jumping. I'd be going, this great idea about gambling and statistics from this Annie Duke book really relates to this episode of Seinfeld or whatever. Now I'm doing it for myself to connect ideas and people together, usually across some chasm, but then I'm using it in my client work, or I'm using it when I'm talking to somebody else. I realized that, and this was part of the transition out of doing something just for myself by collecting this stuff and reflecting on it, was, I can show people how this kind of happens in real world by inviting 2 people from totally different fields to talk about something and then helping connect a bunch of these dots.
Okay. So you mean when you say how to network their ideas with their people, you mean how to network your ideas inspired by other things that you've consumed with your people?
Yeah. And I'll put an A/B on that. Okay. I can do that, and I can show people and bring in outside ideas. Or one of the things that's in my regular work and consulting work all the time is somebody else gives me the mishmash of effectively what is their personal archive, whether or not it's formalized in any way. And then I'm like, oh, did you ever notice these like 3 connections? Did you ever notice this
Mm-hmm.
thing in your founder story that goes all the way back to this guy's childhood? Why are we not talking
Mm-hmm.
about this?
Okay.
It's
Okay.
both of those.
That's another piece of it, is connecting the dots amongst their own ideas and own things.
Yeah, and
Okay.
own interests, because chances are I have weird interests across the board too and can relate.
Okay. Which is also right in line with what you do on the podcast.
Yeah.
So part of the value that you find in a personal archive, and sort of also part of, I know you're not really pitching it, but part of your pitch to others to do a personal archive is you start keeping track of these ideas and you're going to surface connections between them that you don't realize. And you meaning the person who does it, may find them themselves, but also someone like me or someone on the outside may be able to connect dots for you that you didn't otherwise. All of which perfectly aligns with what you do in your show and also aligns with what you do in your work. Correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So you have a blog post. I went on your site after sort of seeing this and was browsing around. You have a blog post titled, it's actually, I think you have a list of like your most popular posts or whatever. And I think the first one you have on there is why you need a personal archive, right? First of all, is it true that that's one of your most popular posts, or are you just showcasing it because you want to showcase it?
That was a surprise one that became a more popular post. I wrote this and then a bunch of people shared it and started talking about it. So that
Yeah.
was
I
caught me off
love it,
guard.
by the way, and plan to share it in my newsletter soon. So I'm going to send more people your way. Why do you think it resonated with people? And why were you surprised that it resonated?
I think so. This might have been right at the beginning too, where everybody started talking about stuff with ChatGPT and stuff like that. I have to check the date and line this up, but it feels like it was culturally relevant in some way at the moment. And I was saying just like, you should take notes and not be worried about other people caring about the same stuff that you care about. You should start to track this stuff. You are an interesting person. There are creative connections to be had here. And if you just make the habit of building the stuff that matters for you, you'll better know yourself. You'll better know how to communicate. I just think it's a wonderful exercise. I think some people really were like, yeah, this feels a lot better than trying to force fit stuff into, I don't know, LinkedIn crap or whatever.
Okay. And then in that post, you have a line that I thought was interesting as well. So you say, if you collect a library and then collect your responses to the library's items in a personal archive, you can search, share, and connect entries at your leisure. And just for a quick point of reference for people who haven't read it yet, in some ways, your explanation or your sort of definition of the personal archive is like when you say if you collect a library, what you mean is all the stuff you're consuming, articles, videos, movies, TV shows, books, whatever, you're not just sort of writing a diary. You're basically reacting and saying, oh, I watched this and it made me think about this, or this was a really interesting line from this book or article or whatever. Like your quote unquote personal archive is you sort of reacting to things that you consume primarily, correct?
There has to be a reflection. That's one of the other more popular posts, which is literally just a snip out of somebody talking about Virgil Abloh and like the 3% change for his ownership. Just this idea of you need to reflect on it. It needs to be something that hit you and why, and you connect it. Because now you have the great Hemingway quote or whatever you want to capture. This is my not beef with the second brain idea, but where it's just like, yeah, I can make a repository of 100 million quotes, and that's interesting.
Right, but then what?
But then what's actually cool is if there's that Hemingway quote and then you tie it to, it might just be a personal story, or it might be something that goes, it makes me think of this now. And 5 years later, it might make you think of that same thing or something in a whole new way or useful in a whole new way. But anchoring it to that reflection that's really been the unlock of when I go back through old posts and the stuff that's duds and the stuff that feels good is it's that personal reflection is actually kind of everything towards tying those connections together.
Okay. So now I'm going to go back to that excerpt again and tell you what I thought when I read it. So you said, if you collect a library, then collect your responses to the library's items in a personal archive, you can search, share, and connect entries at your leisure. And the first thing that popped in my mind is I'd like to see you do it.
Awesome.
So I was like, have you shared that? Have you actually shared a version of you doing either explaining how it works, I don't know what it would look like, but I was like, I bet there's people that are like, oh, that's really interesting. So that idea that, okay, he's collecting it, he can search, he can share, and he can connect entries. Like, what is he searching for? What is he sharing? What is he connecting? How is he deciding what to sort of write or pull out of a thing? And I don't know what it looks like. Maybe it's a one-off video. Maybe it's a blog post about the process. But what struck me is you have this blog post, this personal archive idea. It's resonating with people. It's very interesting. It resonated with me. I think it probably makes people go, oh yeah, I'd like to do a version of that. You're explaining sort of what you do, what you get out of it. But to me, it like prompted this obvious question of, oh, it'd be really interesting to see like, how does he actually do it? I've shared it in my newsletter. We'll put it in the show notes. Billy Oppenheimer, I think his name is, who worked for Ryan Holiday. And he has a long blog post about his sort of note taking system. And Ryan Holiday, I think, has published one as well. But like, they go way down into like step by step nitty gritty, and people love it. It's like of like what they're doing and how they're choosing and how they're organizing. And so I think the people that are interested in that would be interested to nerd out and actually see a version of how you do it and what you do. That's a sort of side note in terms of, well, what do you do? What do you do with this? If anything, does it matter or whatever? So you can go deeper down that rabbit hole of showing people more of the process, helping them do it, helping them figure it out. And maybe there's stuff there, maybe there's not. I don't know.
I know there is, because I
Yeah.
know this is something that regularly happens, especially in some of these more, if somebody else is downloading, kind of like what you're doing for me now, somebody else is downloading their story, I'm helping spot those connections and spot like road mapping out what they're going to do next. Almost every single time I'm like, here's 1 or 3. Oh, what you're describing is trying to hit these like ramps, put the cherry on top of this
Mhm.
client stuff. You never read the Heath Brothers books. You never read Made to Stick. Let me pull up the
Yep.
post about this soccer game that I saw in the rain, but where I at least bulleted out those posts and made the connection. And here's how you can apply this to your startup, because I think this would be really
Yep.
useful. And that stuff happens like that's 10 times a week. That's happening to me. Probably just need to capture it.
Yeah. So now, so that was like the first stuff that went through my mind. The second stuff went through my mind again, because the personal archive idea excites me. And in some ways, my newsletter is functions as a little bit of that for me. It's just all about a specific topic as opposed to all over the place. So I immediately I was like, for lack of a better word, a bunch of product ideas. It's like, how do you take this personal and not necessarily things that you would sell, although you could sell, they could be monetized, they could not be monetized, but what does this sort of do or become? And so I'm going to throw at you a few different ideas here that I think would be super cool. And anyone that sort of resonates with the personal archive topic, some more complicated than others. But the first one is, what about an app that helps people do it? So I want to start a personal archive. Yes, I could start a blog. Yes, I could do it, whatever. But what if there was an app that was specifically designed? What did you watch? What did you consume? What, prompts, whatever it was, a personal archive could be really cool. A step beyond that, or maybe combined with it, what about a quote unquote social network where every post has to be a commentary about another piece of media? So you have to say,
That's the greatest idea of my personal hell. I love that.
wow, right. But here's the other thing to think about, right? I'm not suggesting you go become Facebook.
Don't worry.
But what if your community,
Right.
what if there's a small version of it? What if
Right.
there's a personal archive? Like, I'm using this term social network loosely,
Yeah.
but what I actually mean is, what if I can follow and there's a feed of people and their only posts can only be what the equivalent of this sort of, hey, I watched this thing, I read this thing, and here's something that jumped out at me. It's interesting because the types of things that you're talking about sharing in a personal archive are the things that people used to tweet about all the time. A lot of Twitter was like, hey, I read this thing, before everything became a cesspool and before all these platforms were like, don't you ever share a link to anything. You actually can't really do this on social anymore. I mean, you can, but without a link to the thing. But so I think that, again, not that I'm suggesting you build a massive social network, but I think creating a space for the right people to share this kind of stuff, I think is interesting. The other thing is,
But I have to say
that,
this. I
yeah,
made the personal archive was started because I couldn't be on social media
yeah,
and share the reflections on those sources. So that's just
there you
weird.
go.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now let's go even more old school,
All right.
the good old days. I guess I'm revealing my sort of age and nostalgia for a simpler social
Bring it
time.
on.
What about an old school blog roll, a blog specifically dedicated to this format that you personally curate and you say, okay, I'm going to reach out to 5, 10 people and say, that not everything that you post on your blog, your website, I want you to start a blog specifically dedicated to the way you position what a personal archive is. And we'll each in the sidebar feature each other's blogs. Again, old school blogger days, and just publish it there. And people can come and surf around, and there's no feed and there's no app and there's no any in terms of like ease of putting it up, super easy. And then, which kind of leads into my next one. So now not only are people incentivized to do a personal archive, but like maybe some people will come my way and there's a sort of like layer of community and whatever. And now I'll go a step further. And let's say if you do that, what about a newsletter that curates a collection of these personal archive notes from a selected group of people? So you reach out. So here's my sort of theory, right? You reach out to 10 people. You say, I want to start this thing, start a personal archive. All that I ask is at least once a week, you post at least one thing commenting about something that you consumed or whatever. Post 10 a day if you want, but post at least one a week. And at the end of each week, I'm going to include one post from each of the 10 people in this network. And that's going to be the newsletter. They don't have to go to I know no one's going to websites anymore, whatever, but they can subscribe to the newsletter. And every week I get an email with one item each from the personal archives of these 10 people. I don't know. I'd read that. I'd write that. That would be cool. That would be cool to me. Wouldn't be that much work. And again, it's a sort of curated experience. I like the idea. I think it makes sense for people to do. And I also think there's some interesting things to do, just even in small ways, collaborate and take this thing that you know is resonating with people and sort of create a format and see what happens. Again, you don't have to do anything. It can just be a thing that you're doing for yourself. And I think that's fine. But if you're actually looking at it and going, oh, what would be a sort of step further with this? I think any of those things could be interesting. And then the last thing I would say to bring this full circle is, what about connecting the personal archive idea to your podcast format in some way? What if, as part of each episode, you share something from your personal archive that relates to what's being talked about? What if one of your questions for your guests is essentially, even if they don't have a personal archive, in that format of what's an idea that's something you saw in the past few weeks or whatever? If you have a kernel of an idea that's resonant with the quote unquote right people, why not give it some more exposure? I know you a bit. I've listened to your podcast. I don't know anything about the personal archive idea until you asked me this question. Didn't know you do it. Didn't know it exists. Didn't know it was a thing. Didn't know that. And just by you asking that question, I now know. I think it's interesting. I suggested some ideas to you. I'm going to share that link in my newsletter. It's going to send more people. So I think when we have, and maybe this is the broader point, right? Anytime you have an idea, a fragment of an idea, a little thing that is resonating more than the average, I think it's always a good idea to be like, maybe I should shine a little more light on it. I know people like it. You don't have to go crazy with it. You don't have to start a social network. You don't have to do any of that stuff. But maybe the people who like your show, listen to your show, would resonate with that. The people like me. And maybe there's little simple ways to make them aware of it. By the way, it's why I put in the intro of this show, one of the lead tease questions was, should you have a personal archive? I know a large portion of my audience is going to resonate with that concept. I'm sure of it, but not everyone, but a large portion of them will. So I just think it's a cool idea. And I think that you should consider ways to shine a little more light on it. Make sense?
It makes total sense. This is something that I've been really, because of that post and because of talking about it in the last year or so, maybe even a little less, it's become apparent that stepping back and not just calling it a blog and not calling it a newsletter. And a lot of stuff that I learned for you is I had to say what it wasn't. I had to say, no, this is not a newsletter. Please stop signing up and thinking you're going to get 3 tricks to do whatever. Right. I'm literally going to walk you through the De La Soul catalog when it goes to streaming and say, this is the conversation I want to introduce this to like my friends' kids with.
Yeah. And by the way, and I'm not that you're looking for another podcast to start or whatever, but a podcast where each episode is someone comes on and shares 5 or 10 things that would be in the equivalent of their personal archive is another way to, if they don't have one, but conceptually, like if you were like, hey, Josh, come on the show and let's talk about, maybe you don't have a personal archive, but it would not be hard for me to come up with 5 or 10 things that you think about.
Here's something cool that you also just made me realize. I haven't hit you up for this yet. So now you're definitely going to hit up for this. I've started just to invite a guest back. So like in your case, I'd invite you back. I show you a clip from a totally different show. So a show you weren't on, but another one from the library. So I show you like a 1 or 2 minute clip. And then basically, I haven't been branding it as this is like a personal archive entry, but I literally get you to reflect back on it. So like I've only done 2 of these that have seen the light of day so far. But in both of them, I play this person this clip from this other show. And then they tell someone, at least twice so far, 2 completely insane personal stories that are like amazing and insightful because these are exactly the kind of people that I want to showcase as part of the network.
It's so funny you say that because
they're talking to me about a personal archive entry. I just didn't even think that's what's happening.
It's so funny you say that because I saw one of those episodes. I forget what it was, but there was something about the format and I was like, oh, that's about personal archive or whatever. Yeah. I think there's potential there and that it resonates with some people. So even if it's just messaging it a little, see what happens. We all have limited time and you don't have to sort of go crazy with it, but it aligns nicely. Again, if you had a community, imagine having a section just for people to share that kind of stuff. Oh, here's a thread in the community where it's, because the other thing I think especially these days, there's a lot of people where they'll hear this, they'll be like, oh, that's a really cool concept, but I don't want to, I don't know how to start a website. I don't know how to start a blog. There's all that friction,
I wrote
right?
that post and it was like, "Can you make me a Notion template? Can you do this stuff?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "I just want to tell you this is a cool exercise. And
Yep.
here's a, Google Notes in my phone works pretty damn well for this on my
Right.
like it works."
Exactly.
Yeah.
By the way, are you familiar with, I think it's a best-selling book, but I think it's done well. That book about notebooks. You heard about that?
So I ended up
There's
going
a
down
book
this rabbit hole
literally
of reading a bunch of these after the push.
there's a book there's a book that's about the history of the notebook.
No, that sounds amazing. Not
Yeah.
John McPhee. It's like somebody else, but yeah.
No, it's not like how to take notes. It's literally the history of the it's one of those concepts I was like, "God, that's brilliant." Somebody just took this everyday thing that no one ever really thought about, and I haven't read it yet, but I've listened to the guy in a bunch of podcasts, and I've heard good things about
All
it.
right. So between
I
my
forget what
yellow
it's
legal
called, but
pads
just
and the
yeah,
stack
just
of
look
old
up,
Marvel
like
books right over here to my side.
yeah,
Okay.
look up the
I already
book
wrote
on the
this.
history of the notebook, and
All
you'll
right.
see it. All right. Anyway, Matt, thank you for giving me an excuse to talk about a bunch of stuff that I like talking about, and I know my audience will find helpful. Let people know where they can check you out, your podcast, follow you, your blog, all your personal archive, all that other stuff. Where should they go?
And I got to say this too. Paid subscriber for a number of years to the stuff that you put out, the skill sessions and everything else. I'm a busy person. I don't have time to dip into all this stuff, but the recordings, the newsletter, all the stuff that you do, infinitely valuable. And I am that freak person who's, pinging you, "Hey, can I buy this episode for somebody else? I think they really need to see this skill session. How can I gift
Thank you.
this?" I love the stuff. So happy to support that too. Cultish Creative, literally, that's the website. That's the easiest place. Got the links to everything at Cultish Creative on Twitter. I'm still active there despite the hellscape that it's become. My name, just Matt Zeigler on LinkedIn. And on YouTube, the easiest place to find me is on YouTube at Cultish Creative, where I playlist all the shows and all the other wacky stuff I do. So yeah, come hang out. I'm easy to find and make some personal archives in public with me. Come on.
Yeah, I love it. My stuff, fortheinterested.com/subscribe is my newsletter. joshspector.com/program is my clients from content program, where you can get skill sessions and all that other good stuff that Matt was just so nicely saying is helpful. You guys have already signed off. I know. Thanks for listening and watching. I will see you next time.